Among criminals, it's not uncommon to hear the justification that they chose a life of crime because they were unable to serve in law enforcement. However, this raises the question, would a brutal murderer be any less dangerous if they were allowed to become a police officer? For Eugene Slattery and his fiancée Caroline Bow, their wedding was a truly momentous occasion. They seemed like the perfect couple, and their firstborn was named Eugene Jr. Later, Terence was born, but unfortunately, he was premature and did not survive. This was not the first tragic loss in Eugene's life, and sadly, it would not be the last. When Eugene was 6 years old, his mother passed away, and at 13, his father died as well. During this difficult time, his daughter Karen, born on September 18, 1969, became a source of comfort. And 3 years later, another girl, Debbie, joined the family. After this, the family of 5 moved to a spacious house with a pool in Delray Beach, a small resort town in Florida near the beach. From an early age, Karen was a sociable, athletic girl with a strong personality. She had many friends with whom she loved spending time. When her older brother Eugene left home to serve in the Navy, Karen and Debbie grew even closer. While in high school, Karen thought about getting a part-time job. Her school offered a babysitting training program, and she decided to take the course. It turned out that she had a real talent for working with children. Karen was so good at her babysitting duties that she was even entrusted with caring for the babies of local police officers. This brought her popularity and made her highly sought after in this field. Around the same time, Karen found a new athletic passion, diving. She showed such promise that she even dreamed of making the U.S. national team. Karen's family lived in one of the safest neighborhoods. It was a fairly affluent community where outsiders rarely entered. Therefore, the horrific events that followed came as a real shock to the city. On Sunday, March 24, 1984, Karen's mother drove the 14-year-old to the home of her latest clients, the Helms family, who had 2 children, 3-year-old Catherine and 7-year-old Jennifer. The parents promised that they would drive the babysitter home themselves around midnight when they returned. At 9 p.m., it was time for the girls to go to bed, and by 9:30 p.m., they were sound asleep. Karen returned to the living room, called a friend to discuss plans for an upcoming trip, and then another classmate who also worked as a babysitter. During the conversation, Karen mentioned that she was going to have a snack and then call again, but there were no more calls from her. Usually, Karen would regularly check in with her mother, as it gave her a sense of security, especially when she was alone in someone else's home. The last call took place at 10 p.m., when the girl reported that everything was fine and she would be home in a few hours. This was the last conversation with Karen. When the children's parents returned, they immediately noticed that the lights in the house were off, although usually where Karen was, the lamps were left on. The couple went inside, but the babysitter did not greet them as usual. They called the girl by name, but there was no answer. Walking down the hallway to the kitchen, the parents saw a large pool of blood next to a torn telephone cord. There was no body here, but a bloody trail led to the bedroom, from under the door of which light was streaming. The man advised his wife to run outside to the neighbors and call the police, while he stayed put, hesitating whether to open the bedroom door. What if the attacker was still inside and had a weapon? Eventually, he decided to wait for the law enforcement officers to arrive. When a police officer entered the bedroom, he saw the body of 14-year-old Karen on the floor next to the bed. The girl was partially undressed and had obviously been raped. Her body was covered with numerous stab wounds, and her face was so mutilated that she could only be identified by her clothes. Examining the crime scene, investigators found chewing gum in the bedroom where the body lay, as well as a broken window with a cut screen, through which the killer had likely entered. Near the house, footprints of shoes and a bare footprint were found right under the window. There were also bare footprints inside. It seemed that the criminal had taken off his shoes before climbing into the house. During an examination of the area around the house using luminol, numerous traces of blood were found. A large amount of it was also found in the shower. Apparently, the killer had washed there after committing the crime. In the kitchen, where the attack took place, the most footprints were found, as well as a bloodied hammer, which was probably used to strike the first blow. However, the knife used for the wounds could not be found. At first glance, it seemed that the only missing item here was the girl. After examining the crime scene, the detectives went to the Slattery house to break the terrible news to the parents. It was late at night, and the parents were still waiting for their daughter to return. They were about to call the police themselves, as they couldn't reach the Helms. The couple assumed that they were just delayed and Karen would return later. But the reality turned out to be much more horrific. This event shocked the local community. After all, the area was considered one of the calmest and safest, and now such brutality. Naturally, the main suspects initially were the Helms, for whom the murdered girl worked. The police were looking for any leads and noticed that they had moved out of the house a few days after the tragedy. However, this version was quickly dismissed. It turned out that the couple simply no longer felt safe in that house. There were no traces of a struggle or blood splatter on them, and their footprints did not match those found. So the Helms were removed from the circle of suspects. By March 26, it became known that an unfamiliar man on a bicycle had been seen in the area on the evening of the murder. All registered criminals and even ordinary people who used such transport fell under suspicion. During the same period, a completely different crime was being investigated, a trailer burglary that took place on the morning of the same day Karen was killed. This happened just a few kilometers from the Helms house. Eyewitnesses reported seeing a stranger on a bicycle during the crime. By that time, the robber had already been detained, and he turned out to be David Clarkson. Upon examining his bicycle, the police found something resembling blood on the handlebars, and on the wheel, gum similar to that found at the scene of Karen's murder. The vehicle was confiscated and sent for examination. After a series of checks, it turned out that the stains on the handlebars were paint, and the gum from the crime scene did not match the one found on the bicycle. So the version about the robber's involvement in the murder was also rejected. Upon closer examination of the Helm family's home, it became clear that no valuables had been stolen. The only item that could not be found was a pair of leather gloves, but it was unlikely that they were the target of the thief. There was a version that the criminal used them so as not to leave fingerprints. However, the robbery hypothesis was completely discarded. A forensic expert determined that the victim had received 18 stab wounds. The weapon used by the attacker resembled a folding knife 7 to 8 centimeters long. Karen's throat was slit with 4 strokes, so she could neither speak nor call for help. Among the 18 wounds, 7 were fatal. The girl quickly lost consciousness from blood loss and died. The attack was so lightning fast that even the athletic Karen did not have time to react and fight back against the attacker. No defensive wounds were found on her body. The medical examiner concluded that when the victim was dragged into the bedroom, she was already unconscious, and only after that the rape occurred. The collected samples were sent to the laboratory for examination, but given the level of technology in 1984, obtaining results could take months. On March 29, 1984, Karen's funeral took place. Many people rallied around the Slattery family during these days, as this was already the second loss of a child for them. The family was devastated by grief. Karen's 11-year-old sister Debbie was present at the memorial service. Even 40 years later, she recalled how devastating this experience was for her. During the funeral, Debbie, who was still a child, thought at one point, seeing her sister in the coffin, that she was just sleeping. The girl reached out and touched her nose. At that moment, she realized that Karen was truly dead. Despite the gravity of the situation, her mother yelled at her, and this incident at the funeral only deepened the child's trauma. No one could understand why this happened. Debbie was even afraid to fall asleep, worrying that she might become the killer's next victim and that their family was in danger. Local residents were also alarmed and frightened, demanding that detectives solve the case as soon as possible and find the culprit to make the city streets safer. The uncle of the Slattery family created a memorial fund designed to raise awareness and obtain information. Various charity events were held, including concerts and sports tournaments. This allowed $50,000 to be raised, a significant amount by the standards of the 80s. It was expected that such a substantial reward would encourage witnesses to come forward and share valuable information about the tragedy. People lived in fear, and the number of other crimes increased compared to the previous year. All this provoked a real hysteria, and by mid-April, rumors spread throughout the coast, even among schoolchildren. At one point, students began to suspect one of Karen's acquaintances named William. The day after the murder, everyone noticed that he came to school with scratched hands. Later, he carved the words, "Trust no one," on his desk. Therefore, he was reported to the police. Checking this boy dispelled the suspicions, but provided a new lead. However, it also turned out to be fruitless. Then a new potential suspect appeared, Christopher Wilder. We have already covered the story of this criminal on this channel, the link will be in the description. He immigrated to the USA from his native Australia. From 1971 to 1975, the man was repeatedly involved in cases of sexual assault. Christopher abducted and killed girls, including models whom he lured to photo shoots, taking the lives of at least 12 victims. The criminal used various methods: shooting, cutting, strangling, and even using electric current for torture. When the police finally tracked him down, there was a shootout in which Christopher Wilder was killed. People eagerly picked up on rumors that it was he who attacked Karen, since at the time of the crime he was supposed to be in that area. This even led to an attempt to strengthen legislation regarding sex offenders. But later he was also crossed off the list of suspects, as it was confirmed that on the day of the murder he was in Oklahoma. Karen's death hit her father the hardest. Eugene had already lost his father, mother, and son, and now his eldest daughter had died. To fight back somehow, the man even founded an organization called People Against Crime, the purpose of which was to fight for the strengthening of criminal legislation. The whole family actively joined in social activities, becoming part of another group called Parents of Murdered Children. Together with volunteers, they distributed more than 500 posters with Karen's image, hoping that this would help lead the police to the criminal. Thanks to these efforts, interesting information did indeed emerge. One witness reported that on the night of March 24, a suspicious man was wandering the street a few blocks from where Karen died. Unfortunately, this lead also turned out to be futile, as details were lacking. During this period, the sheriff's department received a new technology, a laser device that allowed a fresh look at the process of collecting fingerprints. It significantly accelerated it and helped to see what previously remained invisible. The investigators came with it to the house where the murder took place. In one night, they managed to collect a large number of new prints that had not been recorded before. The investigators had just begun to analyze the collected information when, 10 kilometers from the scene of the bloody tragedy, another crime was committed. On May 29, 1984, 2 months after the attack on Karen, the police were called to a house in the neighboring small town of Boca Raton. The patrol officers, arriving at the scene, found a petite 38-year-old woman lying in her bed, covered in blood, a pillow covering her face, and under it a mutilated head. The deceased had been hit with a hammer, which was also found nearby, just like in Karen's case. The victim's name was Georgianna Worden. She was a divorced woman, mother of 2 children. She was born on February 3, 1946. At the age of 20, she met a man named John Worden, and they started a relationship. In 1971, the couple moved to Boca Raton. Here their 2 daughters were born, but in 1977 the couple divorced. The woman worked a lot to provide for her children. On the day of her death, Georgianna met with relatives, visited friends, and then returned home. The mother and children went to bed around 11:30 p.m. and everything was fine. Her eldest daughter, 11-year-old Stephanie, woke up the next morning, on Tuesday the 29th, to the ringing of the home phone. Usually Georgianna answered such calls, but this time no one reacted. Stephanie had to get up herself. Her friend was calling, wanting to invite her over. The schoolgirl was going to call back and go ask her mother if she could do this, but when she knocked on her bedroom, no one answered. Suspecting nothing, the girl went to the kitchen to prepare breakfast for herself and her sister, but here she saw broken window glass on the floor and a large amount of dirt. She got scared and decided to wake her mother. The woman did not respond again. The daughters went inside and here they saw their mother's lifeless body on the bed and blood. It splattered the floor, walls and even the ceiling. The frightened girl called her friend again, asking her to send her father. When the man arrived, he contacted the police. The law enforcement officers who arrived at the crime scene recorded 3 attempts at burglary. The attacker had been watching his victim and then brutally raped her. Before leaving, he even took a shower, just like in Karen's case. In the apartment, the police found a knife that was sent for examination. The forensic expert counted 5 stab wounds on the victim's body and blows to the head with a blunt object, probably the hammer found in the house. This caused skull fractures and brain injury. Tears were also found in the genital area and signs of strangulation on the neck, but the criminal's fingerprints could not be found. The victim's neck was broken. According to the expert's assessment, after receiving such injuries, the woman died within 5 minutes. Most likely, she was raped while unconscious. Due to the extreme level of brutality, the police suggested that the attacker could have been an acquaintance of the victim. Georgianna's ex-husband was quickly ruled out as a suspect, as he had a reliable alibi. During an inspection of the area near the house, forensic experts made an interesting find in a vacant lot across the street. It was a bundle with bloodied sneakers wrapped in a towel from the victim's house. The police used the same laser to detect fingerprints that their colleagues from the neighboring town used during the investigation of Karen's murder. In those years, the Cody's database did not yet exist, so the possibilities for examination were very limited. Already on June 3, 1984, a new criminal act took place, the robbery of a restaurant nearby. A 20-year-old waiter was hit on the head, after which the criminal, threatening him with a gun, escaped with $100. The police of both cities were actively looking for clues to stop the series of crimes. The public also tried to help, and activists again raised the issue of strengthening legislation. Detective Kevin McCoy from Boca Raton analyzed all the suspicious incidents of recent months. His attention was drawn to the northwestern part of the city, where robberies and attacks on women had taken place. He noted all the repeated names and surnames. It was Kevin who first found a connection between the cases of Karen and Georgianna. The investigator noticed that despite the large age difference, the victims had a similar build and appearance. In addition, in both cases, the face was covered, a small knife and a hammer were used. The attacks occurred in the victims' homes. McCoy also found out that on February 9, another attack took place near the Boca Raton airport. 18-year-old Mirlyn Manley was attacked in her bed with a wrench. All her clothes and jewelry were stolen. The girl miraculously survived. Regaining consciousness, she crawled to her parents' room and woke them up, after which she lost consciousness. Marilyn's mother called 911, and her daughter was urgently taken to the hospital. Her injuries were so serious that her skull had to be fastened with metal plates. The girl spent 5 weeks in a hospital bed, barely surviving at the hands of the criminal. Mirlyn was left with irreversible brain damage, memory problems, paralysis of the vocal cords and part of the face. Unfortunately, she could not remember anything about the attacker. On May 22, a young man from Boca Raton, returning home late in the evening, saw some man trying to get through the window into his mother's house. He rushed in pursuit of him, although the criminal was fleeing on a high-speed bicycle. Eventually the young man managed to catch up with him. The attacker abandoned the bicycle and escaped, leaving his sneakers at the scene, which he had taken off before trying to break into the apartment. 2 days later, Monica Simpson woke up from a blow to the head in her own home. Despite severe injuries, she was able to call for help from neighbors, which saved her life. The criminal disappeared again without a trace. That same evening, in her apartment in the northeastern part of the city, 40-year-old Lynn Waite survived an attack. A stranger broke into her place at 9:40 p.m. At first he threatened her, but the woman screamed so loudly that she scared him and he ran away. On May 28, Drew Gorman caught a burglar in her house after returning, but she also managed to drive him away by screaming. Detective Kevin McCoy found a connection between all these incidents, but his guesses needed confirmation. He also drew attention to attacks on female students at the local university in Boca Raton. Several reports were received, and one of the victims was able to describe the attacker in some detail. The detective compared the composite sketch with numerous photos of criminals prone to sexual violence. Eventually, this yielded results. The girl who helped compile the composite sketch recognized one of the criminals. She pointed to Duane Owens. This person had a solid criminal past and numerous convictions for theft and sexual crimes. So the investigation got a serious suspect, but unfortunately, he managed to escape. Duane was put on the wanted list. On May 30th, a patrol officer noticed a suspicious man leaving the city on a bicycle. He stopped him and asked him to state his name. The cyclist presented a military ID in the name of Dan Brown. However, the policeman was convinced that this was a fake, and in front of him actually stood 23-year-old Duane Owens, who was wanted. All employees received an orientation with his photo. At the police station, the officer took the detainee's fingerprints and compared them with the case files. He realized that he had arrested a very dangerous criminal. In addition to numerous outstanding arrest warrants, Duane was the main suspect in the murders of Georgianna Worden and Karen Slattery. Detective Kevin McCoy was the first to interrogate the detainee. Their communication lasted about 20 hours. All this time, Duane did not ask for a lawyer even once. The young man confessed to several burglaries, as well as to leaving his sneakers and abandoning the bicycle when he was being chased by the boy during an unsuccessful attempt to enter the house. However, he denied his involvement in the murders of Karen and Georgianna. Interestingly, Duane liked playing cat and mouse with the investigator. He even quoted him poetry and talked about his criminal talents, as if seeking praise. Then the detective contacted another investigator who had already worked with this suspect in 1982. He communicated with Duane every day for several weeks. Finally, thanks to the help of another police officer, Duane admitted that he had killed someone, but did not go into details. Comparing his fingerprints with those found at the crime scene gave only one match. Duane's trace was found on the book that he tore from Georgianna Worden's hands before dealing with her. When the suspect was informed about this, he admitted that he could have left a print by accidentally touching the book. Gradually, using various tricks, the investigators managed to extract more information from him. Duane confessed that there were two victims, and told how he chose Georgianna. He simply rode his bicycle around the neighborhood, peering into the windows of houses. Then he made several attempts to get inside and eventually ended up in the woman's apartment. According to the criminal, he did not plan the murder, but intended to rob Georgianna. However, he found her sleeping in bed with a book and decided to take advantage of the situation. After the first blow, the victim screamed, then the attacker hit her on the head with a hammer several more times to make her shut up. Duane confessed not only to committing the rape, but also to taking a shower before escaping. The man left clean clothes next to the bicycle on the vacant lot, which he had prepared in advance. Before leaving, he changed his clothes, and threw the dirty clothes nearby. It was then that representatives of law enforcement agencies later discovered. Regarding Karen's murder, Duane did not confess to it. The most that the detectives could do was make casts of the bare feet left under the window of the Helms house and compare them with the suspect's tracks. This was not enough to charge him with the second murder, but the police showed this evidence and pretended that they had strong physical evidence, thus deceiving the killer. Duane told a similar story about how he was just wandering the streets looking for a victim when he saw Karen through the window. He entered the house unnoticed by the high school student, then suddenly attacked her, and killed her. Then he washed himself, tried to hide the traces and left on his bicycle. Duane threw the pocket knife into the ocean nearby, stressing that he changed his clothes and left the bloody clothes in the bushes. Having told about this, he reproached the detective for improper work, claiming that with a thorough examination they should have found these clothes. At the same time, he created a fairly reliable alibi. Having returned home, he moved the clock forward, woke up his brother so that he would remember the time, and then moved the clock back again. If they were interrogated by the police, this could have worked. The police re-examined the area around the Helms house and indeed found bloody clothes and even a pair of gloves that had disappeared from their home. It is noteworthy that in both cases of child murders, those who were sleeping peacefully in adjacent rooms, he did not touch. On June 21, 1984, Duane Owens was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, burglary, and rape. Karen's family realized that they would be able to get justice. Everyone wanted the death penalty for Duane, but this was only the first step on a long journey. The criminal could file appeal after appeal and continue to live in prison. But the local community had already breathed a sigh of relief, because the most dangerous killer had disappeared from the streets, and this was the main thing. Duane Owens was born on February 13, 1961 into a dysfunctional family in Michigan, where in addition to him there were 8 more siblings. Already at the age of 11, he began to use prohibited substances. During this period, his mother died, and 2 years after her, his father voluntarily took his own life. Duane was moved between foster families, but the situation was so terrible that he ran away and began to beg. By the age of 18, he had experienced so much violence that it was hard to imagine. Being homeless, he joined the army. After that, he dreamed of becoming a forensic scientist and even entered a special school in Michigan, but after committing the first serious crime, this dream dissipated. Then he had a new one, to become the biggest criminal. He moved to his brother in Florida. A series of crimes began, in which women were involved in one way or another. Usually he broke into houses, robbed and sometimes raped. He had numerous victims whom he killed according to a similar scenario. He was supposed to be tried, but on the day of the hearing, Duane escaped from prison, hiding in a garbage container. He was found a few hours later, and now the list of crimes was replenished. In October 1985, the trial took place. The prosecution demonstrated a recording of Duane's confessions to the murders of Georgianna and Karen, but his lawyer insisted that the confessions were obtained under duress. The jury did not believe it and found him guilty. The criminal received 2 death sentences and 6 life imprisonments for attacks on other women. As expected, numerous petitions for pardon and mitigation of sentence began. The next trial took place a year later. This time, the brother spoke about Duane's mental problems. The defense tried to write everything off as insanity, but to no avail. The killer decided to appeal his sentence all the way to the Supreme Court. He managed to convince the judge that the confessions were obtained under duress. In 1990, a retrial was scheduled. DNA tests were reconducted as technologies became more advanced. They showed a much higher probability of a match with Duane. The defense continued to insist on insanity and mental problems. Something tangible was required to remove all reasonable doubt. One of the prisoners who was serving time with the killer told how to find the knife that was used in Karen's murder. The accused confessed to him about this. The police managed to find the knife in the specified place. Now an exhumation of Karen's body was needed to compare the probable murder weapon, on which no prints or traces of blood were found, with the wounds of the first victim. For the Slattery family, this was another blow. It seemed that the killer would never be executed. By 1999, the prosecution had provided new evidence, and the defense insisted on the incapacity of Duane Owens, which was confirmed by several experts at once. Despite this, he was again sentenced to capital punishment. The detectives assumed that Duane could be involved in other unsolved murders that took place in this area, but he did not confess to other crimes. The defense continued to file appeal after appeal, which allowed the criminal to live until June 15, 2023, when the execution of 62-year-old Duane finally took place. Almost 40 years after Karen's death. Her mother Caroline and sister Debbie were present in the last minutes of the killer's life when he was given a lethal injection. Debbie wanted to make eye contact with the person who took her sister's life, but he kept his eyes closed the whole time. She herself had had trouble sleeping for all these years, which did not end even after the execution of the sentence. Debbie decided to serve in law enforcement and became the sheriff of Monroe County. Later, she stated that if she could not sleep peacefully because of people like Duane, she at least wanted to serve to protect those who could. Please write your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. For those who are new here, subscribing is the best way to stay updated on future content. Also give a like please. Take care of yourself and your loved ones. Thank you for your support during this difficult time. Until next time, friends.